Welcome to the Digital Fireside. I'm Elle, the corporate griot, a conscious leadership strategist and ancestral architect for women of color. And here we gather in story, ancestral wisdom, and reflection to see ourselves more clearly, lead more consciously, and walk with the strength of those who came before us. Now, if you grew up hearing stories about what it takes to make it, then you already know the script. You have to work harder, endure more, push through, survive the obstacles, and prove yourself through pain. And that blueprint is so normalized that we rarely stop to ask a dangerous question. What if the world has been mistaking survival capacity for success credentials? Yes, because hardships can create grit, trauma can create focus, and pressure can create performance, but it also creates something else. It creates a nervous system that never fully learns it is safe. And when your nervous system doesn't feel safe, everything becomes more expensive. Your decision making, relationships, creativity, sleep, your body, and even your ability to trust yourself. So today I want to name something plainly: nervous system over everything. And that's not because purpose doesn't matter, and it's not because discipline isn't real, and not even because endurance has no place, but it's because purpose that costs you your physiology becomes a distorted purpose, and often a delayed one. And I want to gently challenge the belief that becoming must require collapse. Because if the future generations inherit that belief, we will keep building legacies on nervous systems that are too inflamed to enjoy what they worked for. So let's talk about the generational myth for a moment that success requires suffering. Now, across cultures and religions, there are stories of initiation: the wilderness, storm, the exile, the trial, the desert season. See, all those stories had meaning, but somewhere along the way, we started treating hardship like a requirement, not a season. We started worshiping the wound like it was proof of destiny. We began confusing "I survived it" with "it was necessary." And I want to hold this carefully because I'm not saying adversity is optional in life. I'm saying this: we do not need to keep manufacturing adversity as a measurement of worth. Because when a civilization makes suffering the entry fee to significance, it doesn't create heroes, it creates dysregulated people who build, lead, parent, and love from survival mode. See, your body has a vote in your purpose. Now, here's where we anchor this in biology. Now, your nervous system is not a poetic concept, it's a real, living communication network. It determines whether you feel safe enough to rest, steady enough to create, connected enough to receive help, clear enough to choose, and even calm enough to sustain what you're building. Now, when stress becomes chronic, the body adapts, but adaptation is not the same as health. Now, in research, chronic stress is often described through the lens of allostatic load. That's the cumulative wear and tear on the body when stress response systems are repeatedly activated and they don't get to fully resolve. Now, that matters because a person can look high functioning on the outside, right? While their internal systems are quietly paying the price. Now, the body keeps a ledger and eventually it collects. Now, toxic stress teaches us about the blueprint, something very important. Now, one of the clearest examples of this is what research calls toxic stress, especially in childhood. Now, Harvard's Center on the Developing Child describes toxic stress as something frequent, strong, or prolonged adversity without adequate supportive relationships to buffer the stress response. And when toxic stress becomes the baseline, it can disrupt developing brain architecture and other body systems, increasing risk for stress related disease later in life. Now, the CDC also emphasizes that adverse childhood experiences, also ACEs or ACEs, are linked to long term negative impacts on health, opportunity, and well being. Now, why am I bringing up childhood research in a fireside? It's because so many adults are still living from the same nervous system lesson they learned early. And that is, I have to stay ready. I have to endure. I have to carry it alone. I can't slow down. I can't rest until it's done. That isn't always ambition. Sometimes that is unresolved survival training. And if we build missions from that place, our purpose can become another trauma reenactment, just dressed up in new achievements. Okay? Now, zoom out with me. Now, we're living in a time where stress and disconnection are not just personal experiences, they are cultural conditions. Now, the American Psychological Association's Stress in America 2025 report highlights widespread strain tied to societal division and disconnection. And it also notes that many people experiencing that stress also report physical symptoms. Now, globally, the World Health Organization reported in 2025 that more than 1 billion people are living with mental health disorders, with anxiety and depression carrying immense human and economic tolls. So when we tell people just push through, that's the price of success, we are speaking into a world where nervous systems are already overloaded. And overload doesn't produce legacy, it produces breakdown. Now, there is another side of the conversation, one where we say, but stress made me who I am. Now, I hear someone saying this. They're saying to me, Elle, my hardship made me strong. My hardship gave me wisdom. My hardship made me who I am. And I completely honor that. I would never disrespect the sacredness of what you survived. But here's the deeper question. Did the hardship create you, or did it simply reveal the strength you already carried? Because if strength is already in the bloodline, then the goal becomes different. The goal isn't how much can I survive. The goal becomes how soon can I stabilize so my gifts can lead. Now that's the pivot. That's the new blueprint. So what does nervous system over everything actually mean? It means we stop glorifying urgency as wisdom. We stop confusing pressure with purpose. We stop calling dysregulation drive. And we stop building lives that only make sense if we're exhausted. Because when the nervous system is regulated, you gain access to capacities that survival mode blocks. You can actually think long term. You can collaborate. You can innovate without panic. You respond instead of react, and you can sustain your calling without sacrificing your body to prove it. Now, this is what the world needs next. Not just entrepreneurs, not just more of them, not just more leaders, not just more creators. We need more regulated humans creating from safety. And there is a reality check about leaving and building. And so let's bring this into the equation. A lot of people are leaving corporate America to pursue entrepreneurship and then discovering that what they built is not freedom. It's another cage. Sometimes it's worse because now the stress doesn't end when you clock out. Now the stress sleeps with you in your room. Now, here's one grounding stat to sober the fantasy. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that 34.7% of business establishments born in 2013 were still operating in 2023. That is a 10-year survival rate. So that doesn't mean don't build. It means build with eyes open and a regulated nervous system. Because entrepreneurship does not automatically make you a business owner in the way people imagine. And it definitely doesn't automatically make you a leader. For many, it becomes more responsibility, ambiguity, financial pressure, isolation, emotional labor, and more decision fatigue. And research is increasingly examining stress and mental exhaustion among the self-employed, including how job demands can impact mental well-being. So yes, sometimes leaving corporate is aligned, but leaving without nervous system readiness can turn a calling into chronic strain. Now let's touch the other part here. What would happen if people were born into safer, more stable family systems, systems with emotional regulation, resources, protection, and community? It would change everything about how quickly someone could walk in their gifts. Because when a child is buffered, when they have stable, responsive support, their development is different. That's not opinion. That's supported in the way toxic stress is defined. Stress becomes toxic when buffering relationships are absent. So, yes, generational healing takes place. Yes, generational instability delays purpose, which is why the future isn't about teaching resilience. It's about engineering safety, emotionally safe homes, financially stable foundations, community support, honest relationships, nervous system aware parenting and leadership. Because a regulated child doesn't have to spend the first 20 years recovering from their first 10. They can immediately get to creating earlier. They get to mature faster. They get to build without bleeding. And that is not soft, that is strategic. And that is how civilizations evolve. And now the conversation we're going to go into deserves a little bit of attention. Now, there is something called Nepo babies. The resentment and suspicion that people hold towards those born into wealth, they call them Nepo babies as an insult, while also claiming they want generational wealth. Now, that's a contradiction, and that contradiction is a wound talking, because generational wealth in its highest form is not just money. It is nervous system safety, time, mentorship, access, protection, options, the ability to fail without losing your life. When people hate that outcome, it often reveals grief. Their grief of, I wish I had that. I wish I didn't have to struggle. I wish my bloodline had protected me better. And that deserves compassion, not shame. But it also deserves honesty. Because if we truly want our grandchildren to struggle less, then we must stop romanticizing struggle as the only honorable teacher. So let's bring this home, guys. If you only take one thing from this fireside, let it be this. A purpose that requires nervous system collapse is not a holy purpose. It is an inherited script. See, your nervous system is not an inconvenience. It's the foundation your destiny stands on. And the future isn't going to be built by the most traumatized people who can still perform. The future will be built by the most regulated people who can still love. And that might mean your bravest decision in this season is not pushing harder. It might be resting without guilt, choosing slower timelines, building supportive systems, asking for help earlier, stopping the self-sacrifice pattern, and treating safety like wisdom, because it is. So before we close, allow these reflections to settle, not as homework, but as gentle truth. Where did I learn the belief that success must be earned through suffering? What does my nervous system interpret as normal? And is that normal actually healthy? If I chose regulation as a priority, what would I stop doing immediately? Where am I confusing urgency with purpose? And what would it look like to build my mission from safety, support, and steadiness instead of survival? Thank you for gathering with me at the Digital Fireside. May the stories shared here awaken the leader within you, the griot who carries both memory and vision. Sit with these reflections. Allow them to shape your choices, your leadership, and your legacy. Return often, because the fire is always here for the stories, the lessons, and the wisdom waiting to ignite in you. Keep your fire lit, your heart open, and your legacy sacred.